How many of you have helped an adoptee find their parents? Fantastic. You know, it is one of the best experiences you can have when you see the transformation that comes in that person when they find their family. It's like they are complete. And much of the work I do involves finding people and I don't know what their name is, which is very hard to do. And so sometimes I've been successful, sometimes there's cases I never give up, there's some I'm still working on. But I put together a talk, not just on adoption searches per se, that is the most common reason you'd be looking for somebody without knowing who they were. But also, you know, I find people like people with amnesia that don't know their names, perhaps unidentified remains, we don't know the name of the person. There's a woman in the United States that committed suicide, they thought they knew who she was, and checking her out later, they found out she had stolen the identity of somebody, so beyond that, we didn't know who she was. So, and I worked, in my talk, I'll show you, I worked with some Holocaust children who survived, were child survivors of the Holocaust, but they survived without their identities, and they have no idea who they might be. So let's get started, and I'll show you some of the kind of ways that you can handle it, some of the things that I did that might help you in your searches for people whose names you don't have any idea what they are. First of all, there's always more information than you think. Here's an example. I gave an example. I hope this comes out. Of a case I worked on. I talked about this last time I was here, about Mary Catherine Cook. Mary Catherine Cook, let me tell you who she was. I was approached by a couple that lived not too far from me in Huntington Beach, California. The husband had been adopted and the wife had not been able to conceive on her own. So they had an egg donor who donated to them so they could have children. And they had a set of twins that were about 10 years old at this time. The problem was that now that they were in their 40s, they were concerned that their friends were developing certain medical conditions and problems. And, you know, they were concerned that they wanted to know what was going to happen to them, more or less. They wanted their medical history in order to be able to repair. If there's anything serious in their future, they would know that for their children. So the wife had the egg donor's medical history. They were okay with that, but the husband was a complete blank. He was adopted, and they knew nothing about his birth parents except they knew his mother was named Mary Catherine Cook. She was from San Diego, and her father was a doctor. And that they knew this because right after the adoption happened in late, I think, 1967, the Mary Catherine Cook found out she had some kind of disorder and she would probably not be able to have children, any more children. So there was some discussion on getting the child back, but that never happened. Everything was resolved, and they went, you know, on with their lives. So Lisa, the wife, in trying to find out more about her husband's birth parents, sent to the county, Ventura County, which is north of LA, where he was raised, to get his adoption papers. And 6 months later, this is what came back. It was one of 5 pages. There were 3 typewritten pages ahead of this. This is page number 4, where it talks about, it's a fill in the blank about the mother, who we knew was Mary Catherine Cook. Everything of any interest, of any significance, has been blacked out or erased, and there's nothing. All you see is national descent, was Scottish, English, Danish, Presbyterian. She was about 18 years old, and she had been in California for 12 years, so she came from somewhere else. She moved into the area with her family when she was, 5 or 6? 5'7", 118 pounds, brown hair, not too much there. In the bottom, you see a strip down there that talked about, here's a big, talked about the family. This is the mother, began with an N, or this is the family. She had 2 brothers. They lived at the same address. The ages had been obscured. Education had been obscured. Occupation. The only thing left open was the condition, the health of the family was all good. So you can imagine I did what you're thinking. You're going to sit there and try and read behind the black stripes and hold them up to the light. And, you know, all I had was a scan. Okay, so I said, I just couldn't do it, you know, I just couldn't. I tried to figure out what kind of doctor this was, you know, hiding behind there. And I wrote to the medical associations in San Diego. I said, do you have any Dr. Cooks in the 1960s? A lot of them didn't have any records left, no directories. I found a couple of doctors, none of them began with an R. I wasn't getting anywhere. Okay, so this is what I did. There's always more information than you think. What I did was this. I made an alphabet gallery of the writing that I could see. For example, the G's come from the good health, good, good, good. The B's come from brown hair and blue eyes. I have a P. I didn't show the whole thing. P was Presbyterian. Let me move this out of the way. E was English. You know, Danish was a D. So I collected as much of the alphabet as I could in the handwriting of whoever filled out that form, which probably was not Mary Catherine Cook or anybody related to the family. That was, who knows who that was? An adoption person, a Ventura County official. It didn't matter. Okay, so what I did was, of everything on the pages there, I figured the easiest to figure out would be the occupation. As I said, I worked on what kind of doctor that was, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I said, let me try something else. Let me try the mother's occupation. That's probably not going to be too hard. All right, I saw it ended in an E. The second to last letter is a big, tall letter. What do you think that is? Housewife. Great. So now I'm looking for a housewife who had two boys, a girl, and the girl got pregnant and gave a baby up for adoption. That narrows it down to about 5 million people. So I said, okay, let me look at the brothers. And the brothers, you see the ditto mark? They were doing the same thing in life. All right, what do you think the brothers did? Scholar. Okay, we call that student. So I took the handwriting, I put it together in student. And then because I'm like peeping at it through these little black shutters, I clipped it so that the bottom is exactly the clip. And I compared it to what I was picking at through the shutters. S, T, U, the belly of the U, D. So I have a housewife and 2 students. All right, that narrows it down from 5 million to 3 million. But I'm making progress. Okay, so the next thing I looked at was, look at the layout of the page. You know, you have the national descent, you have a couple of black stripes, a whole bunch of black stripes. This is where the family's information is. Brown hair, so on, so on. This is page number 4. Page number 3 looked like this. And it had only 3 lines at the top. It says, let's see, somebody states in the history of in his family that he is subject to boils. So one of the sons, I can't read it here, but it says, also states there is a history of eczema in his family and that he's subject to boils. Okay, so one of the sons, you have a housewife, you have 2 sons, and one of them is subject to boils. Okay, so you get down from 3 million to 2.8 million. All right? But still, you're still feeling your way in the dark, more information. I was sitting in front of this one day, kind of just pondering, and you know, something struck me about this page. I said, wow, I tipped my laptop back to look at it, and I found I could read whatever was on when they were Xeroxing it, what was laying on top of that blank page. So if you look, remember I told you to look at the layout? This is like a fold here, but look at the stripes where the family's information was. Remember the place where she was from was 2 black stripes, a couple of black stripes. This is a fold that wasn't laying on. So I found out that every page had something about the next page bleeding through, and I had 5 pages, and so now I had a 6th page that they hadn't given me. And that 6th page said just a little bit extra. You know, the boy's name was originally John. You know, it said something about hay fever. One of the brothers had a hay fever. It was really not non-identifying, but it was very interesting. So after I had that, I said, there's a stripe here. I can't reach it. You see this top one here? Not the one going all the way across, but there's a long one and a short one. And that covers the city and the state that she was from. I enlarged just that piece of this paper, and this is what it looked like. All right, it's got some doodads, some speckle and some noise. It's not just flat white. It's got stuff in it. Now what you're looking at now is you're looking at a blank page. You're reading the page behind that has a black stripe, and I hope to see behind that black stripe. After I spent a lot of hours looking. They thought I was nuts. Actually, it has some structure in it, and there has been some bleed through from the letters underneath that black stripe. And let me show you what I found. This is a little bit easier, maybe, if the lights were dim. There is the M is, this is the line here. You see this is lighter and this is darker. This is the line where people were filling in the blank. And I was able to see a little foot like this hanging below the line, and then sort of a little hump that came up, and I knew that was M. And then over here I could see, I wasn't hallucinating, this is really true. I could see some of the structure. It was a D, and then they had some other letters here I couldn't quite make out. So I knew the city she was from began with a D, and the state she was from began with an M. Now, if you know about the United States, maybe you can't recite all 50 states, but if it was an L, I know it was Louisiana. That would be an H would be Hawaii. It would be great. It turns out it has 6 states. That's the most common letter of the alphabet for states, and there's 6 of them. There's Minnesota, Maryland, Michigan, Montana, I guess 2 others, Maine and Massachusetts. Thank you very much. I should know that. I knew that. Okay, so I said she's from DM. Who knows? Okay, but still, I'm getting there. A housewife, 2 sons, one has boils, had asthma. She's from D and an M. She's 6 years old when she comes into California. On and on. All right. So I'm good. I'm getting there. So then what I did, I wrote to the San Diego Historical Society, and I said, can you give me the city directories from 1965 and 1968? Because I figured that if the adoption happened in late 67, the family was listed in 68 directory, living where they lived in December 67, even if they had moved. By then, the directory would have been done. So I looked down the list, and I came across Roy C. and Noreen C. Cook. He was a regional sales manager for Field Enterprises. Field Enterprises is an educational publishing company. They publish, the SAT test that we take to get into college. They publish like reading modules where school children will read a module and then move to the next one when they answer the questions. They do all that stuff. Okay, and they lived at 5262 Pendleton Street in San Diego. Noreen sure fits that shape, doesn't it? And whoever the rocket scientist was that drew these black lines was so careful to try and hide the Y at the end of that name, see that? And put an extra stripe to try to disguise the fact that that name had a descender in it. So I was feeling pretty good. Roy and Noreen. I said, that sure fits pretty good. And then I looked again at that list, and there was another guy named Nelson R., a student who lived at 5242 Pendleton Street. Yes. How about Nelson? Somebody, a rocket scientist again, was very careful to disguise the fact there was an ascender in that. All right. All right, so I said, let me check this out. I said, what about occupation? And sales manager. He wasn't a doctor. And you find this with adoption searches. Not everything is exactly the way they tell you. Sales manager. Okay, I had a sales manager with a housewife with 2 sons. One was named Nelson. I looked up to see if Noreen was still alive, and I found out she died in 1996 in San Diego. Her maiden name was McQuaig, and her mother's maiden name was Nielsen. Yep, there you go. So, let's see, Scott, English, and Danish. The mother is Scottish, and her mother was Danish, and the father was Cook. He was English. To complete the story, there's Roy, and I said maybe he's alive, but unfortunately he died in 2002 in San Diego County, in a city just north of San Diego called Oceanside. So I actually drove to Oceanside to try and get the obituaries out of the local paper, and all it said was Kathy Cook. I was hoping it'd say Kathy Cook of with the city, and I looked all over. There's so many Kathy Cooks, Mary Cooks, MC Cooks. It was a mess. Couldn't go there. But what I did do, I saved the obits. I said there's a missing brother. So I wanted to see if they had the baby after they came to California. And all those indexes online, it says David Cook, born in 1961. He would have been 6. His mother's maiden name was McQuaig. That's got to be him. The name is so odd. Furthermore, David, You see how they disguised the D at the end? Isn't that clever? And he was 6 years old. There they are. Okay, one other missing link. I said, remember, Noreen, I forgot to mention, was from Canada. You know, and I said, well, if Noreen was from Canada, she had to come to the United States. And this is her immigration card through Detroit, Michigan. So there was Noreen. She came when she was 2 years old in 1921, and she came with her mother, Karen. Of course, that'd be Karen Nielsen, and Nelson was named after Nielsen. So at this point, I thought I had made a plan to go over to Kelly and Lisa's house and tell them, get a DNA test, because this all happened very quickly. But by the time I got there, I had already figured it out. So I walked in and I told Lisa, well, I found Mary Catherine Cook. And she was, what do you mean? Now, Kelly wasn't there, the kids weren't there, but they showed up a few minutes later. And he had never met me. And I said, hi, you know, I'm Colleen. Oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you, I found your birth mother. And he's a very sanguine, very calm guy, and to me, it didn't mean anything, you know. But his wife, Lisa, told me later, it was like his hair was on fire. I couldn't tell the difference. He looked fine to me. But he raced to the phone, left a message. We had a phone number. He called Nelson. Nelson turned out, we looked up Nelson. Nelson lived only 8 miles away, and he ran a nonprofit for kids in trouble called Coaches of Influence, where he tried to help kids get disciplined and get back on track. So Nelson, he left a message for Nelson. We had to leave. So the next day, they called me, and I was, oh gosh, I was dying to know what happened. Kelly said he called Nelson. He said, Nelson returned the call. It was a Monday. He says to Nelson, he says, are you Nelson Cook? He says, yes, I am. Do you have a sister named Mary Catherine Cook? He says, yes, I do. He said, did she have a baby in December of 1967? He said, yes, she did. And he said, I'm the baby. So Nelson said, you know, he says, I don't know how my sister's going to feel about this, but my brother and I are overwhelmed to hear from you. We're so happy. He says, I have thought about you so often through the years, and I had always wondered how you turned out. I'm so glad to hear from you. So Nelson called Mary Catherine, who was a church secretary in San Diego. She had never married and never had any other kids. And he says, are you sitting down? He says, well, I sit down for a living. He said, well, are you really sitting down? He says, because someone who claims to be John called this morning. And she says, let me just get my head around this. Just let me think a minute. And they made an arrangement for Kelly to talk to Mary Catherine Cook on the phone several days later. And I heard later it was like they had never been separated. You know, they just had that same language between them. And they were able to meet a couple of months later because David lived in Dallas. That's kind of a distance from about a couple of thousand miles. So on the 4th of July, he was coming to California, kind of to have a family thing anyway, but now there's another reason. So I waited. I was, you know, hearing updates. But on the 4th of July, they called me to say they were coming back from the family reunion. And I said, well, how did it go? She said, oh, fine. She says, Nelson's children were older, so they took our children to the beach while we talked. And then cousin so-and-so came with potato salad, and we had a dinner. And then this other cousin came. We were glad to meet them. And we were kind of wondering how you knew all this stuff. Because every time they told me something, I'd say, wait, she told me that already, you know? So I said to myself, I said, gosh, that's wonderful. It's like they never were separated. Cousin so-and-so bringing potato salad, how normal can you get? I was happy. And then later, we actually met Mary Catherine Cook, and we heard her side of her consternation on all this. And she said shortly after that, she was invited to the kids' school to give Grandparents' Day. You know, and she had to get up and talk about the grandparent being a grandmother, because she didn't even have to be a mother. She just stepped right in to be a grandmother. Wouldn't that be great? Think about that. She never had any other kids. So she got up and said how proud she was of the twins and stuff. And, you know, she was kind of taken with this. And then she said one time she was over at Kelly and Lisa's, a short time after that, and she overheard one of the twins. I mean, they had gotten to kind of mix and know one another. And she heard one of the twins say to his dad, Dad, I don't think that's fair. We only have one mom, but you have two. Anyway, the moral of the story is when you look at adoption records, there's always more there than you think. to tell you something about implicit versus explicit information. What I showed you was explicit, right? It was kind of right in front of you, but you had to put the letters together. Sometimes when you have adoption searches or other kind of searches where you don't know the name, you have to almost breathe in the words and get a feeling for what they really are saying instead of what they are saying just explicitly. This was a man, he was 78 years old. He came to me, his name, I'm going to change a lot of names here. He said he was adopted in Manhattan in 1935. He had looked for his birth parents for 56 years. So he had his original birth certificate that said his name is Harold Memmering. If I accidentally slip and you hear his real name, don't worry, it's fine. I just happen to have it prepared, my talk prepared with all the changed names in it. Harold Memmering, 1935, he said, they said I was named after my dad, so I've looked for Harold Memmering for 56 years, I just can't find him. He had gone to the court in New York trying to get them to open his adoption records. New York just doesn't go there, doesn't do that. He had hired a private investigator to go to the New York State Vital Records Office and sweet-talk the clerk into allowing him to see just the names of his birth parents. And what came back, his mother's name was Gloria Jones, his grandparents were named Max Jones and Marie Jones. Well, you think about that, he was pretty sure he got ripped off. He had gone back to the adoption agency many times, and he asked them, he said, you know, can you give me more information? And finally, in 1976, they kept telling him no, but in 1976, the laws changed in the state of New York that for the first time an adoptee could get the ages and causes of death of his immediate family members. So he had gotten that, which I'll read to you in a minute, but still it wasn't enough to go anywhere with. And finally, he said he had pulled his hair out. He had gone to court. He had had the private investigator. He had genealogists all over trying to find Harold Memmering and Gloria Jones, you know, and it went nowhere. He absolutely had given up. And the private investigator didn't help. So finally, he read about DNA. He read about me. I had helped the police in Seattle try and solve a cold case, and he was struck by this. He said, I've never tried DNA. So I said, maybe you need to take a DNA test because that could tell you your father's real name. Okay, now back up. About the non-identifying information that he received from the adoption agency. I want to read this to you, and I want you to keep in mind several things. I want you to listen to the voice. I just want you to listen. I read this every day for months. The maternal grandmother studied piano and voice in Europe. She graduated from high school. She was German and Danish ancestry. The maternal grandfather died at 55 of liver trouble. He was a successful businessman. He distanced English and Scottish ancestry, which is common in the U.S. And the mother was educated by private tutors. She never worked. She was a trophy wife. They were wealthy. Nothing required of her. So when she got pregnant, she could do nothing but give the baby up for adoption. She couldn't support it. And in the family, she had one brother and two sisters. So there was one boy and three girls in that family. Here's his letter. He said, his name is Stanley. Dear Stanley, I don't have Miss Brown's notes from your contact in 56, but I'm sending you the 1956, but I am sending you the information in our file which we shared with your adoptive parents at the time of your placement. This letter is dated 76, 20 years after his first contact. Your maternal grandmother was a bright, intelligent woman. She studied piano and voice in Europe and was reported to have considerable talent. She graduated from high school and then took up her music. She was of Danish and German descent. Her parents were both dead. Her father was killed in an accident and her mother died from a stroke. She had one brother who was a professor in college. Your maternal grandfather died at the age of 55 from liver trouble. He was educated in a private school and later owned his own large successful business. He was a son of the Revolution. His parents were born in Pennsylvania, and his father died at 50 years of age, and his mother was when she was 64 of a stroke. A brother of his, a college graduate, was killed in the hunting field, and his sister died from childbirth. They were of distant English and Scottish ancestors. Your mother was a lovely-looking girl with dark hair and beautiful dark eyes. She was rather short but well-built, a very attractive girl with a quiet personality. She was educated by private tutors here and in Europe. She studied painting and was fairly good at it. She had never worked nor done anything very much, as the family always traveled considerably, and being the daughter of a very wealthy family, nothing had been required of her. Her father used to own a long string of hunters and was also quite a yachtsman. She had one brother who graduated from private school, but the three daughters all had tutors. Your mother met your father while he was in real estate near where she lived. He seemed very much in love with her. They were both interested in out-of-door sports and sailed together in his boat a lot. Although her family were very social-minded, she liked the simple things and was delighted to find a companion who liked to be with her alone and not always desiring large social parties. She was very feminine sort of person who would be very charming in her own little home. She felt very deeply in love with your father, and she ultimately became pregnant. He begged her to marry him, but her family objected. He said he would help her when her time came, but just at that time his mother was taken sick and he left to visit her. He wrote your mother saying that he was going west, that his wife wanted to get a divorce. This was the first that she knew of his marriage. She did not hear from him again. This was very difficult, as she really loved him and adored you. Her dream was had been to have a son someday, and now she had this perfect little boy. She could not keep him. She had no training to make a living herself, so she could not make a home for you. Although she knew your father well, she never met his family, nor heard much about them. She said he was tall with blue eyes and light hair, very quick mentally, and very gentlemanly in his manner. He was crazy about sailing, a good boxer, and swam extremely well. I hope this information will refresh your memories of 20 years ago. There is an additional note in the record from your natural mother, which states that should you ever return for information, she would want you to know these facts, and that she gave you up because she loved you and wanted you to have a happy and secure future. I'd like a note in a bottle. When I read this every day to get as much implicit information as I could about who this family could be. And what I did really was thinking about the voice of who gave that information. The letter was written by an adoption official, but behind that, the information was given by the natural mother. And I'm trying to hear her voice through this letter. The first question is, about how old was the mother? Was she a teenager? Was she, immature teenager that just fooled around and got caught? Or was she an older woman that had, pretty much given up getting married, the social life? And I came to the conclusion, the way she spoke, the way she described her father, the way she described the hunters, the activities the family was involved in, I thought she was in her 20s. She was not very, very young. She was a mature woman who just was lonely, and she got caught. So in that regard, she must have been born about 1915-ish. I said, how old her father was dead. How old was her father when she died? To me, it was a woman who was an adult talking about, she knew her father as an adult. It wasn't a woman talking about a father that died when she was a little baby, you see. And she wasn't, it wasn't very far along because she was in her 20s. So I said, probably the father didn't die too long before this happened. And it could have happened because he died. The family had been disrupted. Maybe she got loose a little more. She was trying to explore life a little more, and she got pregnant. So I came to the conclusion that her father didn't die too long in the past before this happened. So I said, okay, he died, let me just guess, about 1930, about 5 years ago. It had that feeling. I'm using my intuition. I'm trying to hear the mother tell me who she is. So I said he died about a little bit in the past, not too long. And I said, too, was her family really wealthy, or was she making this up for the adoption agency? Was she fantasizing about, gee, I'm so broke, I have this kid, my family can't support, but I'm dreaming my way into having the yachts and the tutors and stuff. And I came to the conclusion that that was authentic, that really she was talking really about her life. It had that texture of someone who was wealthy, explaining why she couldn't keep the baby. And lastly, I decided, if you look at all that, she was born about 1915, he died about 1930. They were wealthy. I said, the best place to look for this family is the 1920 census before her father died. Okay, so the first thing I did for trying to get the explicit information to work was I went to the New York Times. I figured if this family was wealthy and they were in New York, when he died, he would have to be in the New York Times. Maybe the obituary was there. So I typed in 3 daughters, a son, 55 years old, and I came up with this guy, William W.P. Marsh, who was an executive at Borden Dairy Company. He died in 1932. He was 55 years old. He had 3 daughters and 1 son. One of those daughters was Elizabeth, born in 1916. This man died of heart disease, but our birth grandfather died of liver disease. Okay, I'm okay with that. He was a business executive, but the birth grandfather owned a business. It said he owned the business. And it says this one belonged to a Civil War club called the Union League, and the man in the write-up belonged to Sons of the Revolution. You follow me here? This man belonged to a very prestigious golf club called Ginlig Club or something, and we know that the birth grandfather belonged to a prestigious yacht club. That's where the mother met the father, at the yacht club. This family were yachtsmen. So I said, is that a fit or not? All the explicit information's right. Some of the, maybe it could have just been massaged by the birth mother trying to change the story and hide her identity. So I said, maybe a fit, maybe not. So I contacted this family. I found the descendants. I discussed with his great-grandson, so it would be the grandson of Elizabeth Marsh. And it turned out that this man, his wife's family, was a relative of the director of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, which gave me a leg up to that genealogy. And after some discussion with the birth family, the great-grandchildren of this man, the grandchildren of Elizabeth, and so on, we came to the conclusion it just didn't fit. It just didn't feel right. Yes, all the some of the explicit stuff was right, and we could massage the rest of it to fit, but it just didn't feel right. So I said, let's just keep going. We can always turn back if that turns out to be right. So he took the Y-DNA test, and he came up with the name Frost. And as you probably know, the Y-DNA follows the family line like the family name. So when you want to find a man's name, you take, like we were talking to this gentleman, Mr. Larson in the front, if you take that test, adoptees like to take the test because that helps them find their father's birth name. So my friend Stanley came up with Frost. And we contacted Mr. Frost and we said, tell us about your family, what's going on. He said, actually my family I live in Florida, but my family lives in New York and they've lived there for 300 years on Long Island. He said, but I don't match any Frosts. This screen, I say, was almost identical to Mr. Frost. So we had, some idea they were closely related. He said, but I don't match any Frost. I have a group of, I changed the name, Bradstones, that I match, and it turns out the Bradstones lived next door to my Frost for 300 years. So I think there might be a connection there. I don't know. But so I said, good. All right, that's good. We're getting headway. And Stanley was really upset there weren't any memorings that came up on his list. He said, because I was told that I was named after my father. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe there's no memorings out there you can compare to, but it looks like your name may have been Frost. One of the asides I wanted to say, I looked at a lot of Frost, and this was kind of a weird story about a man named Frederick Frost. He was adopted. His father was named Frederick Beatson, and when Frederick Beatson died, there was a story in the paper because he took his son Frederick Jr. and actually sold him to the Frost family, and he got $25,000 in return. And so when Mr. Beatson died, there was an argument over the Beatson widow versus this adopted out son, who should get the estate. And the story came up about Mr. Beatson promising his son he'd pay the $25,000 back or something like that as part of the estate. And it was a verbal thing. So the widow was fighting over with this adopted out son, who was the son by a previous marriage. It was almost comical how they were fighting it. And so I thought, this is kind of an interesting story, but I never could connect Stanley to any of the Frost family. So after really just killing myself and not getting anywhere, I was done. I couldn't think of anything. So I talked to a friend, which is always good. Get somebody to go over everything and shoot holes in what you do. If you get to the end, you can't think of anything else. Maybe your friend can point out an assumption or something that you made that's wrong. And somebody told me something really interesting. After 9 months or so, she said, have you ever considered that when he was named after his father, that actually Harold is his father's name, and that Memmering might be his mother's maiden name, because the woman he would take his mom's last name. I had never considered that. Duh. And that's, you always relearn everything. You never can learn enough or relearn enough. All right, so I said, that's interesting. Let me go look for female Memmerings. And this is a different kind of search. So I went back through the census records, collecting all of these Memmerings, and then I got to the 1900 census, and I found a family living in New York, and there was a widow, and she had 3 sons and 1 daughter, and they were all grown, and they were still living with her, the Memmering family. So I said, okay, that's interesting, and I put it aside, and the weirdest thing happened. It was like I swear this is interesting. I was alone in the room, and I felt like a woman was standing behind me, and she said, when I flipped the screen over to the next record, she said, you want to take another look at that? And I laughed. I said, yeah, okay. I laughed. And I pulled it back. I swear this happened. This woman was there out of the blue. And, there's nobody there. So I flipped it back on the screen. And there was the Memmering with Wilhelmina. Edward, William, and Daisy and Herbert were her children. But right underneath there was a 2-year-old boy named Harold Bradstein. So really the man was Harold Memmering Bradstein. I said, this has to be him. What's the chance of that happening? And it was. So I said, let me check this guy out a little more. Okay, let's assume that's him. And I followed him. He was in real estate in Fairfield County, Connecticut in 1934. He was married and he loved sailing. He had a boat that was registered with some authority. And furthermore, in 1935, he moved to Florida where he was living with his wife and his mother. So I said, that has to be him. And I tell you, when I called Stanley and told him that, I mean, it was, he's a Southern gentleman, so he lives in Kentucky. And when you ask him a question, it's going to take him a long time to answer. So I said, Stanley, yesterday I talked to you and you were, told me you were real busy. So I said, I forgot to ask you something. I said, if I was to come up with something, do you want me to tell you, or do you want me to wait until all your guests leave? It took him 10 minutes to say yes. And he was saying, yeah, it's so important, and yeah, the guests are, and I'm standing and my hair is on fire. And finally I broke in. I said, I'm really glad that you feel that way, because I just found your father last night. And it was dead silence. And I said, Harold Memmering Bradstone. And he goes, no, I'm glad there's a bench here. And so I went through, and then I said, after we went through the whole story, and he knew I was right, I said, now that your father, I found your father, your mother can't be too far away. Okay, so I said, Fairfield County, Connecticut. Remember, we knew she was born about 1915-ish. She had 3 girls and a boy. The father would have been born 1880, 75 to 80. So I did a very broad search on Fairfield County, not just the city, because they have a lot of little towns along there. And I knew, because whatever was reported about the father, I knew that was right on the money. So I said, the mother is more than likely exactly what the document says. So I went to the 1920 census, I went to Fairfield County, I opened up the intent as wide as I could, did a very general search on Ancestry. I came up with about 200-something hits of families that fell in that category, the man 1880 plus or minus living in that area, and I was down to 186 when I came up with the Jones family. I could mouse over and rule out the people that had 2 daughters and 2 sons that didn't have children, that were from Ireland, and I came up with the Jones family. And in looking, just, drilling into that, father died of liver problems. He was 55 years old. He was a successful business owner, lost all the money in the crash, belonged to the Sons of the Revolution, and he was the founder of the local yacht club. How's that? So The daughter who was the mother was the only one. The father died in I forget, before the 1930 census. The mother was Marie. Was it say Marie Jones was still living with Stephanie and the boy. The other two girls were gone and off somewhere. The mother was widowed, so that I knew it had to be Stephanie. The other girls were gone. So when you look at what happened there, Harold Memmering Bradstone, we only had a fraction of the name, not the whole one. It turns out the reason she was marked down as Gloria is because that was her nickname. So she never, ever went by the name Stephanie. She always went by the name Gloria. So actually, even though Harold Memmering and Gloria Jones, that was right. It was Harold Memmering Bradstone, and Gloria was her nickname, so there we have it. She was born in 1911. Her father died in 1927, close enough for government work. They were wealthy, and they had a reunion. There is the happy adoptee. I called him, and he started making feelers in the family, because obviously his parents are dead. His father died in 1967. His father was married 4 times. His mother died in 1947. She was destitute. Her mother and father had both died. She was left in a tenement in Manhattan. She had 3-day pneumonia, and she died penniless in 1947. He was 12 years old. So he started, all the brothers and sisters had children, and he started, contacting his cousins. And there was a warmth that just rushed out to hug him. And he had to come out to California right after that last year for a dog show. He judges dog shows. He deals with horse races, race horses. And when he came out, his cousins knew he'd be out there. So this cousin had a big party for him. There were cousins that flew in from Rhode Island, from Iowa, from San Francisco, drove up from Southern California. Andy and I were invited. We all got together, and he said that was the highlight of his life, when his family gave him a 1-year-old birthday party. So the last section is, let's use DNA a little bit more to see, what you can squeeze, information you can squeeze out to help adoptees. And what I'm going to tell you about is how I helped a Holocaust survivor retrieve her family information. We're not to the bottom of it yet, but we hope one day. If you want to go to a really fascinating website, go to missing-identity.net. It is a website dedicated to the children who survived the Holocaust without their identities. Every single one, or most of them, have research journals on what they have tried to find out who they are. And these people have dedicated their entire lives to finding out themselves, not their mother and father or grandparents, but just themselves. And if you read what they tried and what they did, you'll be amazed. You'll learn a lot. There was one woman who all she knew really started out with was the people she was hidden with, and she posed as a Catholic child. And all she remembered was there was a young woman from next door or down the hall in the same apartment building that visited the family a lot, and would kind of favor her and play with her and give her some candy or something. So she remembered that woman's first name, and going back to the city directories and the historical records, she found the woman's last name, researched her more, and that was her birth mother. And from that, the mother was gone, she was able to find family all over the world. And she was able, from having nothing, she was able to find her entire family. In 2012, I had an idea that DNA might help identify some of these kids. So I got some help from JRI Poland, which is the big Jewish records indexing website on jewishgen.org. That is the big Jewish genealogy website. JRI Poland is the Polish section of that, run by Stan Diamond, and they have been collecting all of the records from the Polish state archives, indexing them and putting the actual records online. It's a multi-year project. They got millions of records done so far. I also got help, have been getting help from the Holocaust Museum, and I hope you know, if you're doing Jewish research, about the Yad Vashem. That is the remembrance of the Holocaust. Yad Vashem is the Garden of Remembrance, and it's where all of the Holocaust records are being put online. So I thought, I looked for candidates that might benefit from DNA testing. Because if I could find DNA cousins, maybe they would have more of the story, and I could triangulate and try and help these people find their identities. I'll just say 2 slides on autosomal SNP testing to tell you how this works. You may have heard there's a new test called autosomal DNA. What they do when they do this test is they test 700,000 points on your DNA called SNPs. They're just points. And they take your 700,000 points and they put it in the database with all the other people that have been tested. And then they look at how many points you share with other people. And on the basis of how many points you share, that's going to tell the percent of your points you match to somebody else will estimate on how you related to that person. So that if I tested and somebody else tested and we came up with 50% of our points in common, we'd have to be a parent-child combination or we'd have to be siblings. That's the only way that that could happen. If we were first cousins, we'd share in the range of 12% of our points. Second cousins share 3%, and third cousins share a little bit less than 1%. So you find your percentage and you figure out how close your DNA cousin is, and then you have to sit down and do the genealogy behind how you could be related. DNA can tell you you're related, but it can't tell you the exact connection. That's up to you. So for example, if you tested and you found somebody that shared 3% of those points with you, that would have to be your second cousin, and you'd sit down and figure out if you shared great-grandparents, who they would be. And so you can work out your connection. Now it can take you actually some time. The further back you go, the more possible branches you both can connect on. So it's actually can be a very time-consuming thing, but basically this is what you're doing. If they say your second cousins, find out the great-grandparents. If they say third to fifth cousins, find out where in there your family lived at the same time, if you have common names in the family, any hints you got to see where you might connect. The person that we started working with first was this little girl had no idea who she was. And the story is this, that this happened in southern Poland in July of 1942. A couple is walking through a train station, and a woman comes and says, with a crying baby, says to this couple, "Will you buy milk for my baby?" And the couple is surprised, but the husband is okay. He goes off to buy the milk. And while he's gone, the woman asks the wife, "How about just taking my baby?" And the wife is like, "Well, I don't know, you know." The husband comes back, and there's some discussion. They took the baby. They say, "Give us your name. We'll bring the baby back later." And the woman says, "You really don't want to know." And that was the end of the adoption process. They took the baby, and they raised it on their own, and they never said anything really about what happened. And later, about 10 years ago, the parents were gone. An old aunt came in and said, told a story about the train station, whatever little she knew. And the woman was shocked because now her family was not her family. She was somebody else. So her son went and got her DNA tested, and not surprisingly, he got just the maternal, the mitochondrial tested, and found out she was Ashkenazi Jewish. So Poland, southern Poland, July 1942, train station, that's when all the Jews were being transported through Poland to the death camps. You suddenly realize what really happened. The woman took one last chance to save her baby's life, and she did it. So we'll call her Branya. Branya took the autosomal DNA test. And so the first column you see is all her DNA cousins. The first one is named Stan. He was a male, born in 1927. And if you look at the second column, you see the estimate that that company, 23andMe, has produced on how closely all the people are related. So according to the number of points that Stan shares with this woman, Branya, they have estimated that they have to be second to fourth cousins. Good. So I sat down and I said, first of all, I realized I had a big problem because she doesn't know anything at all. And when I talked to Stan, very typically he was descended from immigrants to the U.S. around the turn of the 20th century. I would imagine it was the same way here in Australia. If you had those kind of immigrants, they never talked about their families. Stan's mother had died when he was very young. So when I talked to him, really, he had one half of his family kind of filled out, but he knew very little about everyone else. His genealogy was fragmented. And when I looked at the rest of the people on her list and talked to them, their genealogies were fragmented. They were either descended from immigrants around the turn of the 20th century, or they were descended from Holocaust victims. And neither kind of person really had that full picture of their genealogy. So immediately I had all of this information, what I did have, but it was so fragmented that I couldn't really do what I wanted with it. So I decided to try something else. What I did was this. This is where the train station is located. I said, there's a lot of information here. I don't have all the names, I don't have all the relationships, I don't have the family trees, but I do have some geographical information. So I talked to Stan. I said, where are your parents from? He said, my father's from Romania, my mother's from the Ukraine. Okay, the woman doesn't necessarily have to be related to both of those. She could relate it just to one, but I don't know which one without further information. They live far apart because Stan's parents met in the United States. Then the next one was Tomar. His father was from Romania and his mother was from Egypt. Okay, we don't have to worry about Egypt, but he's on the map too in Romania. The third one was named Itan. His mother was from southern Poland and his father was from Belarus, and they met in Israel and married later. Again, the woman's probably going to be related to one or the other, but not both. So I figured, as I added, Isaac was a product of Romania and the Ukraine again. So what I was trying to do was get enough information, talk to all these matches, throw them on the map, and find out where the bubbles of geography came together. Find out places on the map that had the most color and number of balloons, because people that share DNA share geography. And if I could find that, I could find out where her parents were from, because that's the lines that she connected through. I did this is 4. I did this for the top 20 or 30 over time, and unfortunately this is what I came up with. So I found out what is common sense, that Jews are related to almost everybody in Europe. I'm just about done. So I said, this is kind of tough. So I said, all right, let me back off and just do a couple of them. And I had maybe the first 6 or 7, and I came up with 2 bubbles. One in southern Poland and one in Romania. The one in southern Poland I associate with her mother. So it turned out her mother was from right around that train station. And her father was from Romania. And by the way, they always give you sort of an ethnicity analysis when you do that. And her father was not Jewish. She's only half Jewish. So Romania, non-Jewish, and Polish, her mother was Jewish, from around that train station. 2 of her mother's matches knew how they related to each other. Melvin and Carmel had done their genealogies, and they knew they descended from a rabbi who was born in 1811. So it turned out that she shares the same piece of DNA that they share with each other. So she's a descendant of that rabbi too, and this is the beginning of a family tree for her. For us, it wouldn't be much, but for somebody starting off from scratch, that's a big deal. So we hope that following this geography and following that rabbi's family, we hope to find a descendant of the rabbi living in the area around that train station. That would be a great breakthrough. And so using DNA, with the help of JRI Poland, the Holocaust Center, and Yad Vashem, we hope we can get her back to her family. The end.